In this recording, I want to talk about transferring violence versus dissolving violence. There is a difference between the two. And just like relief and deliverance, which both of them are different things, deliverance will bring relief eventually, but relief itself is not deliverance. A lot of times people confuse transferring violence with dissolving violence. Okay, let me give an example. You have Joe. Just using a common name. Joe has emotional issues. Why? When he was a kid, his parents used to beat him a lot. Why? Because his parents were under a lot of financial stress and they leaked that out towards Joe. Joe forgave his parents in the sense that he let it go. He didn't linger upon it. Joe was not aware that the violence of his parents had an impact on his thinking. He developed wrong thinking patterns. Joe became a cop. He was all into law and order. And as a cop, well, he went way too far. And he even got in trouble with the law for it. Now, what has happened here? The violence that was committed by Joe's parents towards Joe, it did not disappear. The parents, they don't act out anymore against Joe, but the bad tension, the negative energy was still around Joe. And demons began to live in that negative tension. So Joe carried all that bad energy within his energy field. So when he became a cop, and he was in the field, that bad energy began to manifest itself. It transferred onto those people he used brutality upon. And now let's go further. One of those individuals that he used brutality upon, he ended up in jail. He was humiliated. He felt betrayed. He couldn't process it. So after he left jail, he was embittered. So at the job he received now, he became a supervisor eventually, despite him having a record, and he was a very harsh supervisor. What happened now? The violence from Joe's parents remained upon Joe, and from Joe, parts of it, not all of it, but parts of it transferred onto the arrestant. That arrestant, let's call him Frank. Frank now became a supervisor, and as a supervisor, the violence of Joe's parents, also some other violences, all grew into him, and he became this harsh, negative, spiteful supervisor. And there was a guy who was fired by Frank. He came into a depression, had to go to the hospital, and he died. The son later of that man realized that his father had been psychically abused and psychically targeted by that supervisor. So that guy took matters in his own hands and he killed that supervisor. He killed Frank. So the violence was never dissolved. It never disappeared. It just transferred. And the demons transferred with it. Because the demons depend upon that negative energy. So the demons made sure that the violence had somewhere to transfer to. If that guy that was fired by Frank would have spiritual insight, he would have realized that it was a good thing for him to be fired by Frank. So now he didn't have to put up with the contentious climate at the job. But that guy, he was so mentally broken, and this made his body ill, and his body, well, gave it up. So he died. It's a very sad thing. So the violence now returned back to Frank at Frank's expense. Now the whole community was frightened. You see how those demons operate? Demons never waste violence. Whenever there's bad energy, demons become horny and go after the bad energy because they need it. And they do whatever they can to extend and multiply that waste energy. Now here's another thing. Let's say that Frank, that contentious supervisor, now let's say there's a believer working over there. Of course, the believer is going to be targeted because he's operating in the light. The believer walks in love, but the believer is also operating in righteous judgment. So after a while, the supervisor gets so uncomfortable, and the supervisor will either give up his negative will against that believer, or the supervisor will continue at the supervisor's expense. When this happens, the co-workers will likely join the supervisor because they're afraid to lose their job, and the believer soon will get another job. The believer will leave. But what has happened here? The kingdom of God has manifested. The violence that was targeted towards the believer was dissolved. Now, the people at that workplace still had bad energy. Don't get me wrong. But the violence was dissolved, so it didn't transfer on. Why? That believer was delivered. He operated in the supernatural. Okay, let's give another illustration. Let's say that this supervisor is also in a relationship. The young woman he's in a relationship with is operating under a charm. That means that she has this paranormal shield around her that keeps bad energy at a distance. So, because of this young woman is relieved, and this young man, who's a supervisor, feels relieved at her. That's why he feels comfortable with her. And it's really with her that he feels comfortable. And people say this is love. No. This young woman operates in a charm. She is a witch. Not a real inaugurated witch. She is an amateur witch, but a witch nevertheless. And she has the comfort of having a man. And that man, he has relief with her. So that's what keeps them together. In this case, the violence is transferred at their house. Because they live together, at their house there is relief. But those people are not delivered. And look, after a few years, the charm of that young woman works out, and the guy begins to beat her. Why? Because the violence was not dissolved. It was only transferred. The violence of the man leaked out at the workplace. Now, after a few years, that the charm of that young woman, who's now approaching 30, is fading, now the violence remains in the house and is less present on the workplace. So there is a difference between the dissolvement of violence and the transference of violence. In the world, violence is replaced, not dissolved. That's why walk by faith, because by walking by faith, by walking in the supernatural, you dissolve violence around you. And that is what the people around you truly need. That being said, be at peace.